Oh, hi, you're here. I'm Kat and welcome to Clay Oddity Club. Episode 2 will be dedicated to this guy. I found it a while ago at the local thrift shop. You can find tons of dinosaurs toys like this in shops, smaller, larger, more detailed or less, but more often made of the cheapest type of plastic. But this dinosaur had something the other didn't. It had character. I was intrigued by its pose, its frozen, stealthy movement. This figure has great potential to create a truly terrifying monster. And that's when a plan was born. I began preparation during visit to my parents to take advantage of the year's first rays of sunshine and blue sky overhead, and to avoid inhaling plastic shavings while sanding. The plan for this part included removing the logo, mold lines, and scales. After returning home, I began the main part of the project. I used thin but furry wire, printed school that I'd ordered in 2 different sizes and with slightly different designs. At this stage, I still didn't know which one I would use, and the well-known aluminum foil. I started by filling the gap in our monster and starting to create the neck frame. I immediately decided to curve it so it could potentially look at us from the side, allowing us to fully admire its graceful pose. As an experiment, I decided to use some thick glue that had been in my box for too long to reinforce Skeleton's neck. Surprisingly, it turned out well. Next, the butt needed filling. Sorry. Again, the aluminum foil did the job, as you can see, not without problems. Time for the main part, fun with epoxy putty. As I mentioned in my first video, everything about this is simple. We mix the gray and yellow part in the 1:1 ratio for about 5 minutes, and everything is ready. I started by sculpting the back of our monster. All techniques are acceptable. Fingers, sculpting tools, toothpicks, blades. Water is especially helpful for smoothing the surface. Then the neck. I started by building it using small formed balls and strips and connecting it to the body for a natural look. Next, our monster needs a skull. So I chose a smaller one and placed it on the skeleton and started reinforcing it with a putty. The next step was shaping the body and smoothing it out using my fingers and silicone tool. While I sculpt and smooth it out piece by piece, I would like to share a bit of the story behind our monster. The story of this creature has no beginning. The only forgotten mention of it are a few difficult to interpret medieval engravings, obscure local legend that never left the village, a few disappearances with no bodies, and a single entry in discovered diary of caver. The entry begins with the words, "It was in a cave." Immediately after deciding to the cave's deepest level and marking my location, I ventured into the eastern entrance. The corridor continued onward, with no significant narrowings. My exploration was interrupted by the discovery of an unmarked canal with a difficult entrance. After crossing it and remarking my location, I decided to go deeper. The humidity present at the entrance began to intensify. Despite experience, years spending exploring caves like this, my mind began to play tricks on me. If only I had known. Now I see it as a warning. Step by step, the canal stretched endlessly. That's when I felt its presence. I stopped. Beyond the register of light, it stood in my path, deep within. My body froze, and I strained my gaze into the darkness of the cave. It stood staring at me. It lurked motionless, like a spider in its web. It was a creature with gleaming, staring eyes. Its face was too anthropoid, too disturbing to be human. Pale, translucent skin encased a prowling body on 4 muscular limbs, like a reptile, like a primitive hunter. Time froze for that brief moment. My eye registered what no human should see. Adrenaline surged through my body, propelling me to escape. I didn't look back. I struggled through the canal, ignoring the sharp rocks scratching my clothes and skin. I woke up outside. My entire body was in pain. More than a week had passed since I descended into that cave. I haven't been able to recover from my encounter. I also couldn't stop thinking about it. This something was primal, and I'm sure it had always been there. And that's how it was. You learn a bit of the story of our creature. Meanwhile, I finished sculpting and smoothing its neck. Finally, I added a little more clay to even out its shape at the base of the arm. Then I checked my bases, which were all too small, so I went shopping hoping for some loot. And I was lucky. I bought silicone coasters for pennies, and they were the perfect size. They were just a little too flexible, but Cat from the future took care of that. A day later, I came up with a solution. Off camera, I covered the holder with a double layer of glue. This minimized the base's flexing. Our monster needs to be placed in the damp, dark cave. For this, we need a glue, paint, and sand. We mix and add more sand or glue depending on the desired consistency. For variety, I also added gravel and pieces of styrofoam to imitate larger rocks. We apply mass on our base and have fun. I decided to reduce it a bit and instead make small mounds of diversity. I also added some extra rocks and pieces of styrofoam, then covered them with a layer of glue and paint. It's painting day. I primed the miniature and started by painting the terrain, starting with leather brown. I kind of like it this way, never the other way around. I find that the terrain and atmosphere always influence the base character's colors. Dry, sandy terrain or a cold, damp cave, this view makes it easier for me to work on the character, especially since our monster has always been in this place. Its body had to adapt to the darkness and humidity of the cave. Next, I used the dry brush to bring out the first depth of the terrain. I then decided it would also be a good idea to add dark, wet spots. I finished everything off with a final dose of a good dry brushing again. After base, it was time for the monster. I started by covering it with a Dorado skin paint mixed with a drop of grey. I then began experimenting with a slightly warmer brown color. After the initial color and shadow application, red came into play. It gave the skin a thin, translucent flavor. After a chaotic and lengthy process, only details remained to be finished. I completed everything with a red wash and then black. I'm glad to say this, but thank you again for watching. I hope this video inspires you to find the little things you need to create your own words. If you enjoyed it, like and subscribe. Also, check out my Instagram if you want to learn about my next projects.